By the early 1960s, computers had evolved beyond military and scientific applications. For the first time, students and researchers had access to interactive technology, machines that could not only solve equations but also create experiences. This led to the birth of the first true video game, one that wasn't just a demonstration, but something genuinely fun. And it all started with a game about space. By 1960, computers were still massive, expensive, and used mostly by governments and universities. But something was changing. Thanks to advancements in computing, new machines like the PDP-1 from Digital Equipment Corporation were introducing real-time interactivity, allowing programmers to experiment like never before. And among those programmers were a group of brilliant MIT students who would unknowingly create the blueprint for an entire industry. At MIT's Tech Model Railroad Club, a group of hackers, back when hacker meant clever programmer, were experimenting with what this new computer could do. And in 1962, they created a game that would become legendary: Space War. Created by Steve Russell, Martin Greets, and Wayne Whitman, Space War was the first video game designed purely for entertainment. Unlike earlier computer games, it wasn't a simple demonstration. It was fast, competitive, and exciting. The game featured two player-controlled spaceships locked in a dogfight, complete with real physics. The ships had limited fuel, inertia, and had to dodge a deadly central star's gravity. Players had to outmaneuver their opponent while carefully managing their resources. This wasn't just a novelty, it was thrilling. With a simple two-button controller, players could fire missiles, rotate their ships, and warp to escape danger. This was the first multiplayer battle in gaming history. And once Space War spread to other universities, people just couldn't stop playing. Space War wasn't just a game, it was a phenomenon among programmers. It spread across university networks, evolving as students modified it, adding new features and strategies. But there was just one problem. Almost no one outside of universities had access to a PDP-1. For video games to evolve beyond research labs, they needed to escape the confines of expensive university computers. And that's exactly what would happen in the 1970s. By the end of the 1960s, one man saw Space War and realized its potential to become something bigger. His name? Nolan Bushnell. And what he would do next would change history forever. Bushnell was fascinated by Space War, but knew that the PDP-1 cost thousands of dollars, far too expensive for casual players. So he began brainstorming. How could he turn this into a commercial product? In 1971, he got his answer with a game called Computer Space, the first ever arcade video game. Though Computer Space wasn't a massive hit, it proved that video games could exist outside of labs. And Bushnell wasn't done yet. Just 1 year later, he founded Atari and launched a game that would introduce gaming to the world: Pong. Atari's Pong was simple, but it was addictive. And unlike Space War, it didn't require a massive computer, just a coin-operated arcade machine. It was an instant success, and suddenly, video games were no longer just an experiment, they were an industry. In less than a decade, video games went from a small, niche experiment to a full-blown cultural phenomenon, And it all started with Space War, the game that proved interactive entertainment was here to stay. For the first time in history, video games were leaving the arcades and entering homes. What started as simple experimental machines in universities had now evolved into an entirely new form of entertainment. But before gaming could conquer the world, it had to overcome one major challenge. How do you bring interactive entertainment to everyone, not just programmers and arcade goers? This is the story of the birth of the home console. By the early 1970s, video games were gaining traction, but they had one major limitation. You had to go somewhere to play them. Whether it was a university lab or a smoky arcade, gaming was still a public experience. But what if people could play video games at home, anytime they wanted? That dream was about to become reality, thanks to one pioneering console, the Magnavox Odyssey. It all started with one man, Rolf Baer, an engineer who had been dreaming of interactive television since the 1950s. Unlike others who saw gaming as a novelty, Baer believed in something revolutionary, a video game system for the living room. Baer called it the Brown Box, a prototype that would become the world's first home video game console, and in 1972 it was finally released under a new name, Magnavox Odyssey. The Magnavox Odyssey wasn't just the first home console, it was a glimpse into the future. It came with removable cartridges, allowing players to swap between different games. But unlike modern consoles, these cartridges didn't contain any data. They simply reconfigured the system circuits. It also introduced a groundbreaking concept, external controllers. While crude by today's standards, these simple dials allowed players to move objects on the screen, laying the foundation for modern gamepads. But there was one problem. The Odyssey's graphics were extremely basic. To compensate, players had to use plastic overlays on their TV screens to simulate game environments. Despite its limitations, the Odyssey was a modest success, selling over 350,000 units. It proved that home gaming was possible, but it would take another company, one that had already shaken up the arcade scene, to truly ignite the home console market. That company was Atari. In 1972, Nolan Bushnell had already revolutionized arcades with Pong. Now he wanted to bring it to people's homes. But the technology needed to shrink arcade hardware into a small, affordable box simply didn't exist yet. After years of development, Atari released the home Pong console in 1975, featuring the same addictive gameplay as the arcade version, but designed for living rooms. Unlike the Magnavox Odyssey, Pong was entirely digital. No overlays, no weird cartridges, just simple, intuitive gameplay. And people loved it. Atari had proven that home video games could be a mainstream success, but their next move would change gaming history forever: the creation of the Atari 2600. Before the Atari 2600, home consoles were limited to built-in games, but this system introduced something revolutionary: interchangeable ROM cartridges, a true video game library. With its joystick controllers, colorful graphics, and arcade-quality games, the Atari 2600 became a household name. By 1980, it had sold over 1 million units, and by 1982, that number had skyrocketed to over 10 million. Gaming had officially gone mainstream, but success came with consequences. The early 1980s would see a flood of low-quality games, leading to one of the darkest moments in gaming history, the video game crash of 1983.